Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast. I am here with Mally Locke, and we're sitting in a hotel room in Alexandria. Welcome to my hotel room.
Thank you for having me.
I'm checking out later today, but first we will have an interview about philanthropy, if that's all right with you. And I would like to just dive right in. We're going to start with your childhood. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Guyana in South America. Guyana is the only English-speaking country on the continent of South America. Moved to the Bronx when I was just before my 6th birthday. And there I grew up until I was 18. Then went to college or whatever. So I guess I would say the Bronx.
When did you move to the Bronx?
When I was 6.
6 years old. So how much do you remember from before?
I actually have memories, sort of more almost like movie-like memories.
Yeah.
But I do have memories of growing up in Guyana. I have memories of going to the airport before we left, arriving in the U.S. Guyana is a developing country. Sometimes construction would start on houses in our we had a house in a cul-de-sac. And one of my favorite memories from growing up is remembering walking onto a construction site with my siblings. This is a long time ago, no safety codes, probably still no safety codes, and a cow walking into the house right alongside me. It was actually terrifying because I was like maybe 3 years old.
I remember my first cow.
Gigantic.
Scary, big, scary critters, yeah.
Very scary, and
They smell too.
I don't mind the smell, but it was alarming, and I was down there by myself because my siblings were brave enough to climb the rickety ladder to go to the 2nd floor of the construction, but I wasn't. And so I was down there by myself with
You
the
suppose
cow.
that was his house, the cow?
Probably.
You were trespassing in his home.
There was manure a lot, so he'd been
That
staying
cow had
there
done well for himself.
pretty well.
And was building him, and had some people building him a home.
Yeah.
Very good. So then the Bronx. Mm-hmm. It's a big place. I was just there on my way down here.
Really?
Yep. Well, I drove through it. And I've been there a few times. I have not been to anywhere in South America, but I imagine that it's different.
It is very different. Again, I haven't been to Guyana either now
Oh, you haven't been back?
I have not been back. We had a house until 2018. And I think we might still have property there. I'm not really sure. That would be my brother's or mother's domain. But other members of my family have been back. So I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And my elder siblings went to, middle and high school there. And so they had more entrenched roots and memories, whereas I left when I was so young that I don't have any personal relationships outside of my family.
Very interesting. When you got to the Bronx, what did you think of it?
It was alarming. Going again from a developing country, a lot of open space, unpaved roads, knowing everyone, walking everywhere. And I arrived on October 30th, 1983. It was an especially cold October. And I didn't have a coat because Guyana's a tropical country. So got off the plane and, my mom had gotten coats. So let me back up a little bit. My mom actually left us, the kids, in Guyana when she moved first to the U.S. So she was a nurse and she was able to get residency here very quickly at that time. But, she couldn't sponsor the rest of us immediately. So my dad stayed in Guyana with 6 kids. She moved here with my eldest sibling who went straight to Boston University. My mom lived in the Bronx, got herself established. A couple of years later, 3 more of us moved over. So we came over with my dad. Then he went back, stayed a little while longer, then came over with the rest of the kids and, took care of closing up shop essentially in Guyana. So it was a lot of disruption. And I also hadn't seen my mother in 2 years, from the ages of 3, after age 3 to age just before my 6th birthday. So over 2 years. And I didn't recognize her at the airport. And that's still one of my mother's, as you can imagine, hardest memories. And now as a parent, I cannot fathom what she had to do to get us here. But anyway, I remember coming off the plane, lots of people, it's freezing cold. She put a coat over us, over me, my two sisters that were with me. And it was just like everything was big and loud and crowded. Oh. And I remember the very first night, one of the first things we had were apples, because apples are, again, not a tropical fruit. So we'd only read about apples. Didn't know they were real.
What did you think?
I think I liked it, but I don't really even remember that clearly. And then we had my sister's birthday was October 31st, Halloween. And her request for a meal was McDonald's. So we had McDonald's on for the very first time again in our lives at that point, and everything was very new and exciting. But I hated then, and I still hate now, cold weather. Soon thereafter, she had to enroll us in school, and, went to school, came back the next morning. She was like, okay, we're going back to school. And I was like, I have to keep going. And obviously acclimated pretty well, but it's a very, very jarring experience. We lived close to in the North Bronx, and there was an elevated train line near the apartment that we lived in when we first moved here. Again, loud, crowded, yep. No greenery, like just dramatically different from everything. But yeah,
I myself I live in Maine now. Fairly not the cosmopolitan part, and as you know, I was in DC for a long time. And it's been it's very, very relaxing. And one of the things that's very nice is you get up and you look out, and you see a house or two, and there's the road. Mm-hmm. Like there's I don't know, maybe 5% of the vista is man-made objects, mm-hmm. right? And maybe you'll even hear a man-made sound, right? In New York, 98% of what you see out the window is man-made object, and it's probably noisy and maybe moving, or there's steam coming off of it, and there's just way too much unnatural stuff to look for any one person to look at and process.
Yeah. And what's funny
and when you go directly from it, it was just really, I'd been to New York many times before, and I haven't spent the summer recently up in central Maine. It's really something. I think those people who live in New York don't realize how overstimulated they are.
Exactly. So I moved to DC 6 years ago, 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago now. And I lived in the Bronx and Brooklyn, and never really wanted to move. Ended up moving here because members of my family had moved here. I had my son, wanted to be closer to them. Now, when I go to New York, I'm shocked by how, again, too much it is, too loud, and DC is a city, certainly not the same scale, but mm-hmm. we have so much more green space and so much more sky because the buildings are all low, and I never realized what a huge difference and impact that was having on my mood and all of those things until now. When I go back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I lived here and loved living here and never imagined not living here. And now I can't imagine living there again.
Yes. And absolutely, the DC here is a city. Even here in the Northern Virginia, it's all quite urban, but lower. It's a little bit more tolerable to me. Still too much. It's all still too much. I think, once upon a time, most people lived in rural areas.
Yeah.
And cities were unique. And we are, particularly Americans, no one likes to buck the trend, right? You go move to the city and you live in the city, mm-hmm. right? That's the, cool thing to do. And it's not what's best for me, or where would be the best environment for me, or it's just, the coolest thing to do is go work, move to New York, work in publishing or whatever.
Well, I don't know if we even think about whether or not. Well, when I lived there, I certainly was like, oh, New York, I can't imagine living here. I loved being a New Yorker, but I don't think I realized. Again, you don't realize it until you're outside of it, and I don't even think certainly wasn't really a choice. It was like my family lives there. I moved back there after college, and then I had to work there. Yeah. But I think now, again, gratefully, a lot of people I know have moved out of cities since the pandemic. Pushed out initially just by the pandemic itself and not wanting to be in close quarters with other people, but also then being like, oh, wow, I like this so much more. My quality of life is better. My happiness is better. My kids are happier. I feel like I'm part of a community.
Yes.
So a fair number of my friends my age have moved out, and I'm happy for them and happy for all of us because it has made such a huge difference on quality of life.
Absolutely. And particularly when it comes to our proposal authors that we review, one of the things I've noticed is that many of them, when it comes to their fundraising, and also sometimes when they where they physically locate themselves, they're not in their home. They go to a big city because that's where things happen.
People with
And
money
there's
are.
probably people in their hometown that would be extremely excited to support their cause, right? And they'd be much more likely to be able to get a meeting with them. And you might even be able to send cold solicitation letters to people in your small hometown, right? And maybe they know you for your whole life. You try to move, I did it once. I came to DC, nobody knew me. They let me have a job with very little responsibility for a long period of time, right? But you don't have that. If you're trying to start, you really want to get into the nonprofit world and work on issues, it's good to be part of a community where people know who you are and feel like you have value and are willing to talk to you and remember you afterwards. Even Unfunded is not focused on Maine, right? But I get a disproportionate amount of support from people from even when I was down here, right? Because those folks, I matter to people there.
Yeah.
And even people in DC who like me and like what it all is and understand it intellectually, right? Not fundamentally not from here, and plenty of folks that are, right? And increasingly philanthropists are, right?
Well, it's also
Focused on and looking for I see it in the RFPs that we review. They want the leaders of the organization to be members of the community where the work is being done. But we do have a lot of folks who are like, well, if I want to start a nonprofit, it's going to have to be New York or the city or whatever, and they might be better served, right?
totally.
You don't necessarily need to. When I graduated from college, I don't think I considered anything other than one of the big cities. That's where jobs were. That's what you did. I've been trying to, because I think about that lately. Did I ever spend any time thinking about
I don't think anyone
staying?
did, though.
At no point did it occur to me. I don't think it had just been assumed that I would leave the whole time.
But I think that that's a pretty normal thing. Within certain colleges and universities, that the churn and the sort of current is actually, it's funny. I was thinking about this myself recently, and thinking about grind culture and work in general, and the fact that I have very deliberately stepped away from that. I have a great job, but I only work part-time, and I am very clear that I don't want to... work doesn't dominate my life the way that it used to pre-pandemic, and that was one positive outcome. But grind is something that I feel like I was swept into because, again, of the social settings and the culture that I was in. You go to this school and, people go on to become bankers and, consultants and lawyers and doctors. And I didn't spend a lot of time investigating what the alternatives were, including where I would live or that I could do something completely different and, whatever. There was a lot of defaulting to the norm. And I'm grateful with age and much more experience. You're like, I don't need to do that. And I hope that I spend some time, talking with younger people and encouraging them not to do that. Just don't do that if you don't actually want to. I spend more time investigating what you actually want to do or what you actually care about, because it's very easy to just default to what everyone else is doing or feeling like they should do.
One of the things that has happened to particularly our smaller communities that might have contributed to right? The brain drain that has occurred for the last, I don't know, probably like 75 years in America. You've had the brightest rural students all trying to go to the cities, right? And that was not always the case here. And one of the things that changed is church attendance. Right, you got really involved in your church in your hometown, you'd probably be more likely to stay there. Now, particularly the best and brightest in rural communities, much less likely to be going to church at all, have any kind of religious background. Did you yourself have any kind of, did you go to church in Guyana or at all when you got to Bronx?
No. So my mom was raised Catholic. My dad was raised Protestant. That was not initially a challenge, as it usually isn't when you first get married. And then when you actually
For their parents?
For their parents, no, not at all. But when you start having children, and then you're like, oh,
well, what will they be? Yeah.
What are they going to actually do? So instead of making a choice, we kind of did neither. We went to
a common tale.
Church on Catholic church usually on big holidays.
I've been. It's fun. Easter's fun.
Easter can be. Christmas Mass. I mean, I love all the spectacle of all of it. Went to my dad's church sometimes because he did go to church. But he didn't really take us necessarily with him all the time. But and for him too, it was very much a social thing. Like a lot of friends of his from Guyana had emigrated here as well, and they went to churches in Brooklyn. Most Caribbean people, not most, but a lot of Caribbean people live in Brooklyn, as was the case with my dad's friends. And so one of his social outings was to just go to church in Brooklyn and see his friends, before or after church.
Fellowship.
Exactly. That's exactly right. But no, we didn't really grow up with a specific religion. In addition, what's interesting is that two of my sisters became born-again Christians later in life. I don't know what the sects are. One is Church of Christ. The other one, not really sure. And my son, interestingly, is very interested in religion and God. And we actually read the Bible together. There's a it was like
I was going to ask which translation you did.
It was an illustrated.
I don't like all the. I tend to like. I've seen a few of the children. There's an illustrated children's version.
Yeah, so there was it's an illustrated version, but it's a graphic novel. So it actually is like a big
Sure.
book.
Yeah.
It's Old Testament.
Cool.
And it's actually it's great. I'm a big fan of graphic novels and comics, and actually he's developing that taste now. But my sister, one of the born again Christians, Yola, gave it to him as a gift. Because she'd given him those little baby Bibles before, and we'd read those, and he again had expressed interest in it, would watch these Bible cartoons. Again, I never was promoting it, but I wasn't saying not to do it, because I think there are good stories, and I think there are some good morals or ways of being that we can get from religion and from community that you can. And in fact, when I had my son, previously not interested at all in really in joining any particular religious group, church, I actually searched for one for non-believers, and there are some, because I wanted the community, not because of the. And again, I like the idea of thinking about philosophy and thinking about.
I've been to quite a few Jewish temples, and they're basically just church for non-believers.
Oh, that's awesome! and so I wanted that for my son.
Well, there are many, I think, and I've been guilty of it myself in the past, to focus on the negative aspects of organized religion, which is why so many folks have decided to cast it aside.
Absolutely.
And that can be fine. It is probably not the only way to maintain community, find fellowship, and discuss values. Right? There's also, for a very long time, religious institutions were the driving force of basically all philanthropy.
Absolutely.
Not that long ago, most program officers were nuns in the Catholic Church.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, they weren't. They were pretty much the only program officers. Right? Once we started actually building foundations and everything, in fact. The very first giving advisor I ever interviewed on the podcast was Elizabeth McCormick, arguably one of the first giving advisors to actually use that term. Mm-hmm. She was a nun who was president of Manhattanville College, which involved a lot of fundraising. Oh yeah, I was very lucky to get the interview, and I believe it's the only podcast that she ever went on. She has unfortunately passed away. I know for a fact that she was the oldest person I ever spoke with.
How old was she?
I'm not supposed to tell you. There is at one point she says how old she was at a certain time, so it's possible to listen to that episode and figure it out.
What's interesting?
But my grandmother was 96 when she died, and Elizabeth was older than that.
Wow, good for her.
And so that's why I think she was the oldest person I ever met. But we talked quite a bit about her. She got hired by John Rockefeller.
Wow.
To set up his foundation in the beginning. So this is why it was a good interview for me to get.
That's amazing.
And actually, she was up until the Rockefellers were just paying our bills, like up until the end. She never held a wallet in her life, right? Because she joined the convent when she was a teenager. Never had any money, and they take a vow of right, they're not supposed to hold the money or whatever. She did want to. She left the nunnery because she met a Jewish man and that what she wanted to marry. And so she needed a job. So the Rockefellers were like, well, we're setting up this thing. It's called a foundation. You're probably good at that kind of stuff, right? You've been fundraising for the college. You've also been a grants officer with the diocese. Nuns are still doing that. And a lot of best practice around philanthropy at the foundation level was stuff that she set up.
That's awesome.
You may be familiar, you may have even heard of it, but like most Rockefellers in their trust, it's like the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule. Yeah, so they get money. If you're a Rockefeller, you might imagine there's money that comes to you. Mm-hmm. You have to, invest a third, donate a third, and spend a third, I think.
Oh, that's funny because we have.
And she's the one who came up with that.
Well, it's funny because we have a third in our family, but that was not through anything other than just what financial best practices were. So this is not something I established. Actually, my son's father established it so that he wanted him to grow up understanding money in a way that I didn't.
Yeah.
And so from very early on, he was like, you can spend a third, you save a third, and we donate a third.
Yes.
And so we have these little piggy banks that are spend, save, share. And he gets his allowance and he determines which goes in which bucket. And so we've been doing that for a couple of years. It didn't really resonate until now that he has a little more understanding of what some of this means. And so this holiday season, we're taking the share and we get to be Santa Claus and we get to give to other people and trying to instill that as part of his life, which is not something that I grew up with, but hopefully.
Well, a big part of the original Rockefeller Foundation was not just giving away his excess wealth, which he called he called it obscene at one point. He thought he had too much money, which
he did.
And he gave a lot of it away. But a big part of what her job was coming in there and running that foundation was to train future generations because he knew all these people are going to donate money. They're not going to have to work for it hard like I did, right? And he was worried about them being spoiled or not understanding things or not being generous with it or who knows what he was worried about. I don't know. I didn't get a chance to talk to him. But like David Rockefeller, who just passed away a few years ago, had to take classes with this lady growing up in order.
Wow.
You have to pass the trustee school that she set up in order to be able to access your thing. I do think that has reverberated to a lot of folks. And a big part of philanthropy advising is often that intergenerational connection.
Yes, that's true.
Sometimes for good reasons. Other times just because the wealth managers would like for the fund to stay at that particular bank. Right? So if you're managing a large amount of money for a wealthy person, that guy's going to die someday.
Yeah.
Right? So you should start thinking before he dies about his inheritors, because it'd be great if they could keep the money at the bank.
Yeah, and they provide
only about half of them do. Half of them usually go to take the money and go to some other house with it.
But it makes sense as a strategy. Like I have a lot of friends who work in or run family offices, and it's such a weird world to be in, in this weird family dynamic and the discomfort that most people have around talking about money, but having a lot of money and managing money and learning about how to be rich, essentially. One of my former clients it wasn't a trustee school, but it was effectively you're rich, now what? It was actually it was good for her to have a peer group of people who were in this unique position. But it was, again, because her parents weren't necessarily comfortable talking to her about their absurd wealth and, their own discomfort with it, especially not having grown up with wealth. Anyway, I do think that those can be useful.
Yes, absolutely. The one hitch in it that I've noticed is oftentimes we put some of this burden onto fundraisers at great organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That they not only do they have to raise money for this great organization, but they also have to help grandpa and the grandkids get along.
Yeah.
That's now a new thing. They have to be a family dynamics expert on top of
Absolutely.
their already overworked role there. Mm-hmm. And if you're very good at that, great.
But if you don't want to do it,
that's not really something that I think we should be asked. It's already I've had to do it myself. I raise money for my own thing. Mm-hmm. That's just a lot to ask.
It is, and it's very it can be very, and has been at times, very odd and uncomfortable and just a weird situation. Yeah, there needs to be more boundaries, and unfortunately, because again, people and wealth becomes so much about relationships rather than on, let's say, this is the thing that I want to do and you're going to help me do it. It becomes much more of me coaching you and educating you and becoming like a psychologist or something and understanding how your brain works in order to get you to do the thing that I think makes most sense. And so it just becomes this very complicated and unnecessary relationship. And unfortunately, a lot of philanthropy is family philanthropy. And so you do end up having to negotiate all of that bizarreness.
Morgan Stanley and a lot of those places hire family psychologists who, if they're burnt out from the psychology game, and they're like, did you know that you can buy things with money? And they bring them in, and they're very good at this stuff.
That makes sense. That's a great idea. Did not know that.
They have the occasional good idea over there, right? That's how they're able to manage all the money that they get to
They've been around for a while.
Managing.
They figured it out.
And in general, that's the one thing that they have all kinds of creative strategies and everything, but the goal is the same. We would like our pile of money to be the largest.
Yeah.
And it can seem confusing. All the stuff they're doing, particularly with if you look at some of the ultra high net worth events they do and the marketing materials and stuff, right? And you're just why is it being phrased that they would like for their pile of money to be the largest pile? And it just sort of will bring some extra clarity to it. So do you remember, going back to your childhood for a moment, the first time that you made a gift or did something generous?
No, actually, and when I was reviewing this, I was trying to think, do I have any? And
have you ever? Is this something that has not happened yet?
No, it still hasn't. Just kidding. I don't. So I wasn't aware of my own privilege and relative wealth in quotation marks until maybe middle school. Because I was, I went to a neighborhood school in the Bronx, and then I went to a private school. And so I went from being a normal kid to being oh, there are people who are really, really, really rich. And that's actually how my entree into this world even started, was way back then, and comfort with it, I guess, started way back then. But as a part of our school requirements, we had to do community service hours every day, not every day, every year, a certain number of hours that, increased over time. And so for many years, I worked at a soup kitchen, or I volunteered at a soup kitchen in the Bronx. And that was where I was oh, I'm certainly not rich, but we are incredibly privileged. I didn't realize that, within my own sphere, I could, and within the borough of the Bronx, actually, I lived one place, my school was one place, and the soup kitchen was in another place. And it was oh, wow, we all exist here, and yet we have no connection to one another unless we deliberately seek it out.
Did you choose the soup kitchen, or were you told you're volunteering at a soup kitchen?
No, I chose the soup kitchen, and there was a list of different opportunities. That was one of them. And actually, two of my siblings would go with me. And because they got more interested in it too, as a way of oh, wow, I also didn't realize that this was here.
It's kind of a fun way to volunteer. You meet people, they're all very grateful. Sometimes the soup's good. Sometimes.
Gratitude wasn't what
Most of it comes from like the staff of the facility.
No, the staff was great, and the people who
They're
were
the ones who
working
think
there.
they're the ones who are very grateful that you're there.
Yes,
Well, the people who are hungry, they're just hungry.
they're just hungry, and we served them, and cleaned up, but we didn't have a ton of interaction with them, especially since we were only there for like 4 hours on a Saturday. Later on in life, many times actually came back to that same soup kitchen.
What is it called?
It's called Pots.
Pots?
Part of the solution.
Awesome. This is a solid name.
It is, and it's been there.
Plus, the soup comes in pots.
Exactly, and we had big pots.
like huge which
The cauldron
pots?
things.
Neat.
I was a program officer. When I was at Robin Hood, they were a grant recipient. When I was running Maverick,
so wait,
they were one of our biggest grant recipients.
You volunteered. Where did you first volunteer at this place?
When I was in like 7th grade.
So in 7th grade, you volunteered there. And then
fast forward.
at least 20 years later,
Yeah.
right? You're working as a program officer and you got to give a grant to the place you volunteered at?
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, it was a very cool turnaround, sort of loop, to be able to come back and volunteered there year after year, and then still had engagement with that organization. I think it's a great organization, and it's in the same location, but they were able to buy the sort of dilapidated buildings that they were operating out of, and change them into these beautiful buildings. Started also by a nun. Yeah, it was started by several members of a local convent. Sister Mary Alice. She was awesome.
Actually, so it's Sister Mary something.
Yeah, there were some great. I have to say, social justice nuns are the absolute best.
Yes. The best. They're up there.
They're up
in the
there.
list.
No, there's some
in the conversation.
There's been a few of them that I've met in my travels.
The nuns on the bus. And
exactly.
A couple other things and we've read many proposals written by nuns here. They are fundraising and giving grants and generally doing good work. I grew up down the street from a convent actually, and they would walk past the house and everything. I don't really have much of a problem with nuns.
I have a memory of when I was younger and going shopping with my mom at some ladies' lingerie store. So getting undergarments, and waiting for my mom to finish whatever she was doing, and a whole group of nuns came in and they were buying pantyhose, and I remember being like, oh right, they need this stuff too. For some reason it was shocking to me to see a nun outside of a religious setting, and I was like, oh yeah, they're human beings. But anyway, that was just a funny memory I had of. And
they do travel in groups.
Yes, often.
I think Elizabeth's the only time I've ever seen one alone. You started your education in Guyana and then went to a school in the Bronx for high school.
So Guyana. It looks like it should be there. So there's 3. There's Guyana. There's British Guyana, which is now just Guyana. Then there's Suriname, which was Dutch Guyana, and then there's French Guyana. And I think people often confuse the pronunciation of the French with the English. Anyway, too much detail. But I actually went to Catholic school run by nuns in Guyana, and then went to a public school down the road when I was in the Bronx.
Very good. Yes. In general, I placed when I was at Atlas Corps, I placed fellows from 87 different countries. And if it's those countries, I will pronounce it correctly, and I know what language they speak, and the capital and everything. If any other country, I have a hard time finding it on the map.
Yeah.
But I know a lot about these. I've gotten visas from 87 of them, and I know a lot about those. Some of them are Canada and generally pretty well known places.
No one has heard of those countries. Well, also the population. I mean, it's one of those things where similarly to
I never got to
rural drain to urban centers, there's huge brain drain to everywhere else outside of Guyana. The population has been decreasing rapidly. Hopefully, there are some changes that hopefully will keep more people there.
I don't even remember having a candidate from there, and I'm surprised usually if it was an English speaking country, that was the easiest. That was much easier to do fellowship placements because the language was there. But it was almost always Colombia or Brazil if it was from South America. I guess they're big, right? That's where people live.
Yeah, many more than in Guyana. There's like maybe 700,000 people.
Terrific. So you went to you graduated high school and you went to where did you go to college?
I went to Yale.
Yale. Bula Bula.
Yes,
A bulldog.
that is correct. Handsome Dan.
I was briefly on my way through New Haven, just the other day, and my mother went to Yale.
Oh, really? That's right. Your mother was a French literature professor, correct?
Well, she went to Wellesley, and then she had a PhD from Yale. Yes, and in French from there in I don't know, the 1600s or whatever. But she has a stuffed bulldog down in her house, and is Handsome Dan is his name?
That is correct.
He's a handsome little fellow. Did you like it at Yale?
I loved Yale. Yeah, I can't. It's funny. I was just talking to someone earlier, and I said that Yale produced two types of people: amazing human beings and real, not amazing people. I don't feel like there's a lot of people that are sort of just middling. But yeah, I had an incredible experience.
I've met some from both groups.
Yes, you will.
Yesterday's guest went to Harvard.
Harvard.
And we spent a little bit of time talking about that. Harvard's endowment is, speaking of growing the fund as big as possible, there's head and shoulders above everybody else. I'm sure Yale's is also large.
Yes.
But I know that I tend to zero in on Harvard's because there's this, I think, probably twice as big as the next biggest one.
How much is it these days?
Their endowment is over $50 billion now.
Yeah, I think Yale is about half that.
Yeah. Which is still
right. It's absurd.
A very large amount of money, an unfathomable amount of money. One of my criticisms of the word billion is it sounds so much like million that we think it's just like a little bit more.
No, it's a lot.
Right, and you've got 25 billion of it sitting there, not for nothing, not paying less taxes than some other money. I think they do pay some on some stuff, probably.
Yeah.
Enterprise that vast, and like payroll taxes to the employees and everything, but like, not the same as if that money was somewhere else. And obviously they passed the public support test,
Yeah.
so right, they're providing some benefit there. But like a general, whenever I meet anyone who went to one of these like very largely endowed schools, Dickinson where I went has billions, but single digit billions. Still a kind of crazy amount. One thing that you never hear anyone say is, "Oh no, I only have $900 million." But having that is not enough to get like the special billionaire attention that they get. Anyway, it's a few things I'm fairly interested in. When you went to Yale, how much did you understand about the like financing of it and I mean, surely you knew there were scholarships and tuition involved.
Mm-hmm. I definitely knew there were scholarships and tuition because I had to pay it. And I had financial aid and loans. I had no idea about the size. I mean, again, this is 25 years ago now, so the endowment wasn't quite as large, but I had no idea how much money the institution had. And looking back on it, especially now, I have a lot of... anger isn't the right word, resentment isn't quite the right word either, but like the fact that tuition is even a thing that they make kids at all pay, like who, and that has gotten better over time, but it shouldn't even be like a thing at all. Like you shouldn't have to take out loans to go to these schools because they have more than enough money.
Taking out a loan so that you can give it to someone with that much wealth already the loans are strange to me. The other thing that I remember when I was at Dickinson, and I imagine this happened at some point at Yale, I got reminded pretty regularly that the cost for me to attend Dickinson was actually more than the tuition.
Thanks.
And that I owed my being there to the alumni donors. They were making that very clear to me from the very beginning, which I'm sure I now know is best practice for fundraising. They were setting me up.
Yeah, to become a donor.
Long term, right? That, in addition to if let's say someone's already taken the loan out to be there, to go in and try to press that narrative on them, if anything's going to make me mad, that's it's a lack of candor, and it's very close to straight up dishonest.
Yeah, and I these days I find I'm not an alumni donor to either my high school or to Yale.
My next question is, do you donate to Yale?
No. Both have more than enough money. If they never took another cent from...
They can make money, too. They got real estate. Rent it to
Yes,
people.
exactly. They own most of New Haven. But if they never took another dollar from a student, it would make no difference.
In most schools, this is the situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And so to me, again, I'm like, why is this something that you put especially lower income people through? And then make them pay. I paid off my loans many years after I graduated, but like, again, it should not be an issue. And what it furthers as a student, as a lower income student, there is a class divide and a feeling of just being less than. You're the ones who are serving your fellow students. You're the one who is cleaning up after your fellow students. Inherently, I think that is wrong. And the fact that I spent in some years 20 hours working when I could have been doing extracurriculars or just studying or doing nothing, to me was a poor use of time. I think it was good from a development standpoint because it really helped me manage time and think about things like that. But I could have learned those skills later in life. And so yeah, so definitely don't get it done. And unfortunately,
I just think that when you're 18, you show up at college, and it's like you're very excited to be there. You're gonna believe whatever they're dishing out.
Yeah.
And to like take that position and like set yourself up for future fundraising success off of these folks is rough. One thing I was reading about recently is that so folks who can very clearly tie their financial success to where they went to school, and who like intellectually, like maybe it's not true, but they intellectually think it. Right? So like I make a lot of money because of my Yale degree, right? They would be less likely to donate to Yale if they personally didn't enjoy their time there. Someone might enjoy their time at Yale and then not have a successful career, right? And not be able to be like, well, I make money because of this. Like the financial value is not in their picture. But if they like enjoyed the parties and had a good social life, they will be much more likely to donate. And the like, that's nostalgia. If we have a fondness for a place, we're much more likely to support it.
Yeah.
And it really highlights for me that like giving decisions are very often not intellectual decisions.
Absolutely. And so to me, whenever people are like, "Oh, I'm going to give $50 million to this university," I'm always like, "Why?" I mean, in some universities,
it'll be good press. They'll write about it.
For some colleges and universities,
they can handle that much money.
Yes, exactly.
If you gave me that much money, I wouldn't spend it well. Or I would just put it in. I would have a $50 million endowment, and
I bet you wouldn't.
I can't instantly make my budget go from $75,000 to $50 million. I don't know how to do that.
Yes, you could, but that would be assuming that you wanted to. If someone gave it to me personally, I know exactly what I would do with it. If someone gave it to like, you would figure out how to do it because you would pivot and be able to support.
No, I know what exactly I would.
Exactly.
If I'm assuming I'm allowed, I would set up an endowment fund to run the organization. But that's not really why people give.
It's not
$50 million. People who give $50 million, I don't. That's not.
No, but would you really set up an endowment? Would you?
Right now, yeah, I don't. It's this isn't this is a fun hypothetical and everything, but like it's not in any danger of happening.
So yes, it's a fun hypothetical, but I suspect that after doing the work that you've been doing,
I would increase the budget a little bit, but I'm
not even talking about the budget. I think. All those great applications that you get, I bet you would at least find a way to support some of the great ideas that come through you.
Probably not, no. I mean, we're not a grant maker, and I very much don't want to be. And I'm assuming if someone gave $50 million to one funded list, they wouldn't be giving it to me because I'm just going to re-grant it. We're a review program, and quite frankly, it's not that expensive to run a review program. Like, even in my wildest dreams, and I've put down, like, my wildest dream budget. Not very big. $50 million would cover it for forever.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. That's what I would do with it. I think there's lots of people giving grants.
There
and
are
in fact,
a lot
that doesn't. They don't. And some of them are having no impact at all. The money's going out, and nothing's really happening. That's not what the. I noticed that it was difficult to get your grant proposal reviewed, and that's what I'm trying to do. So to me, just to give it to the. And not for nothing, the vast majority of the proposals we read, like, aren't, like, right now, based off of what I've read, not ready to be funded. promise and just needs, but I can't just give. I've hardly ever received a like proposal that I liked so much that I like wrote my own money to it. Mm-hmm. Right. That's not what they're they don't apply here for money either.
I understand. I just feel like and again, maybe I'm just it's just naturally what my inclination would be to like, I just wouldn't know what else to do with it, because it's like, I also don't believe in perpetuity, or endowments. So, that's the other thing.
I think there will always be proposals of some kind, and getting extra perspective on them will always be useful. I hear that a lot. It's kind of a cliche in the space now that like all nonprofits should be like planning to put themselves out of business. I think some should, mm-hmm. right? But like I don't believe we'll ever get to the point where reviewing will become useless.
No, I didn't. I
right?
wasn't suggesting
that. Yeah, no, I'm just saying. I'm sure you've heard that cliche before.
Oh yes, no.
I've heard people very aggressively be like, if you're not planning to put yourself out of business, then you're doing it wrong, right? And I don't like, if you're running a soup kitchen, maybe.
Probably not, though. And that's an organization that
they should have at least some thought of like the systemic nature of the problem.
Absolutely, but poverty is not going to be something that probably goes
expecting
away.
The soup kitchen to. And actually, in my hometown, there's a group, a nonprofit that maintains our trails. We have a really cool walking trail system. Also, at this time of year, our Maine's homeless. We don't have that many, but we have some of them. And generally, this time of year, they are moving south. They're trying to get away from the cold. And a lot of the folks from Bangor are currently in our hometown, and they have set up a little encampment on one of the trails. And this is a nonprofit run by volunteers. They have absolutely no money. Like, it is an unfunded situation. They're just they're trail people who care about the trails in their town, and they're managing it. They should not be asked to do anything with this homeless encampment.
Absolutely.
So what they didn't. What they did is they said, listen, this trail is now enter your own risk. Mm. We are not able to we call the insurance company, like, this is not something we're managing anymore. Right? There's 100 tented individuals here, like, we are 6 volunteers. The town is just like, oh, how dare it, like, they're so mad at this nonprofit for not solving the problem.
I mean, it's amazing that people...
They're just like, you're burying your heads in the sand. And like, you instead of finding a solution, like, what solution? What do you expect an unfunded group of 6 volunteers to do about this?
It's also so completely outside their purview.
Yeah. And if they were to do anything, it would be wildly inappropriate, and they would fail.
Absolutely. Exactly.
We have a small, there's like 30% of my hometown are just little grumblers who complain about anything, and who are particularly angry at the homeless for being lazy drug addicts.
For being homeless.
Yeah. Needleville is what they like to call the little encampment down there. To be clear, I've seen absolutely no evidence. It's near where my office up there. As far as I know, they seem just like people who are camping. I've seen not a single needle or anyone obviously on drugs. It's not all that unpleasant, really. It's just like there's some people camping on a trail.
Yeah.
But these folks who are really only barely above homeless themselves, like, they're only barely housed, and I think they may not even know that. This is an opportunity for them to look down on somebody. And
yeah. Well, and also, we have...
it's all very unfortunate.
Well, and this relates back to our larger issues around philanthropy, money, etc. in this country, right? People think that, first of all, that poverty is a personal failing. So there's that. And then we have such negative beliefs of the poor and people who don't have homes or jobs or could be addicts. It doesn't really matter. Actually, there's plenty of people who live in homes who are addicts, and plenty of people who don't live in homes and aren't. Like, addiction isn't resigned to just one group of people either.
Of the folks criticizing this encampment, I think there's probably more addicts in the critical group. Painkillers or whatever, whatever they're on. It's a pretty big drinking town too.
But that goes into when we even going back again to philanthropy and where money goes. There's so much negative belief around people who are poor that many philanthropic or governmental programs actually are so like, this is what you need to do with your dollars. You can't spend it outside of this, and you can't make choices on your own because clearly you failed and you can't do this. And it's like, well, that's not true.
Homelessness is and housing. There's several different issues that I've seen people conflate sometimes, and I try to avoid it. But there's homelessness, and then there's also housing security, which are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Really. Very similar.
Yeah.
Right. And there's also there's food security, which is very similarly right. Many issues tied up in this, but like sticking with just homelessness, this is a very good. This is sort of proof to me that like there are some systemic things that fundamentally aren't working.
Yeah.
Right. You've put a lot of money into this issue, and you've really not done anything about it. Right. By you, I mean all of philanthropy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And in fact, government funding towards it
Absolutely.
and everything. Another one that's like less interesting to talk about is traffic. You know how much money we've spent like trying to like make traffic better in certain areas, and you can't do it. I've known some people who worked at IBM on the on trying to fix New York's traffic problem, and down here they've tried things like they're trying new things everywhere. Right? If you add a lane, it doesn't change anything. The traffic congestion stays the same. They just instantly fill up that lane.
Yeah.
It's just nothing. And with one of the issues with homelessness is the like demanding certain kinds of impacts before the grant gets spent. Mm-hmm. This is a really complicated issue, interconnected with like 9 other issues. Mm-hmm. And this is something where restricted grants work very well for like researching gallbladder cancer, I think, right? And also sometimes for the arts.
Yeah.
Or actually education at a big college, right? You go to Yale and you're like, we really want to see this part of the school get better, and restricting it towards certain things, or at a capital campaign. Lots of times it makes sense, right? With these with an intractable social issue, like that's how you make it intractable. Like honestly, I think that the circles and the dances we make some of these folks do who are trying to resolve these issues, and it's like different. You'll have a different like corporate funders make them do one dance. Yeah. Government funders make them do a different dance.
Absolutely.
When I was in education for a while, we would have at SEED, there were many different ways you could track our impact, right? High school graduation rate or college rate. Sometimes the foundations would want not where they went to college, but how many years it's taking them to graduate from college. Yeah. Slightly different metrics I needed for each one. Every single grant we had, none of it unique. The organization itself was not. We didn't. If you asked us, like, what do you care? What metrics do you care? Like, no, depends on which funder, right? And education is also somewhat intractable, and right, like, generally, I'm a fan of letting these practitioners try to solve these problems, like finding the best local practitioners and letting them run the school or try to help the homeless in their community, right? The general idea, and this has been, I came from DC, where there's a lot of people who are very familiar with social issues and like aware of how intractable homelessness is, right? And then back in my hometown, a lot of people who are most angry about our homeless problem there, which is insignificant compared to DC's.
Sure.
As far as I can tell, all these folks are very happy with their situation. While they may be technically homeless, they're not interested in a job. They have a nice tent, and they're very happy with what's going on. They might be some of them are veterans, and so they're getting a little check, and they're very happy. They're perfectly capable of living in the woods, and they like doing it. And so if you go with them, and you're like, well, as long as they're willing to work and follow these rules, then like none of that's going to work. This isn't even you're not even solving his problem for him, right? He might have some things he needs that can make things better for him. But like right now, we have this large group, and they're just like they're really confused why there isn't a like tiny house development in a certain parking lot, and I just like it's weird to go from a place where that's full of people who are intimately familiar with social issues, and then to go to another place where you've got people who are like really don't know what they're talking about, none just as confident with their solutions.
But that's the case all across the board. With every issue,
when there's a
lot of people who don't know the underlying issues and feel quite capable of pontificating about what the solution
and there are no
should
bobos anymore come out and be like, no, that's not the truth. Like we have like lost control of like any form of universal truth. Everyone's opinion has to be respected, right? Like these like when I'm in my local groups on Facebooks, and sometimes I like try to chime in about like why that policy won't work from my considerable experience, right? And it's just like, well, that's your opinion, I think, and I have my opinion. I'm like, yes, but I know what I'm talking about.
Well, if only research guided decisions or evidence guided decisions, I think would make a lot of different choices, both individually as well as socially. One of the things I was just talking to a friend about is, childcare. Childcare should be universal. It can be easily funded.
Yep.
It can be done. We've chosen not to do it. All the research shows that we should, from an economic standpoint, from a well-being standpoint, whatever. But people are like, no, you chose to have kids, so therefore,
Yep.
F you.
And you've got regulated childcare, prohibitively expensive for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm.
So the number one choice currently is unregulated healthcare. The whole point of having regulations is to regulate the childcare.
Yeah.
But like if those regulations make it so expensive, no one can afford it, then they're not doing anything for anyone.
Exactly. And even the regulated ones, the people who work there are still so tragically underpaid.
Yeah, I know. In particular in DC, I know there's these like extremely underpaid places. There's basically just like a English basement, right? That and the parents drop the kids off there. And like this, if you're in Adams Morgan, you ever see like a group of 20 kids being led on a rope?
Yeah. I see it all the time.
And that's what we got. And you're right. We absolutely there are children. We know they exist. We know they need to be cared for. It's not like this. None of this came as a surprise, and anybody should be in the budget, right? And we act like it's personal choice, personal responsibility. They need to care for themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe sometimes it is.
In some cases, sure, but I think that
many people are able to like wait until they have the financial bearing to like.
That
would be an ideal.
That would be an ideal situation. It would also. But even with that,
given what no matter who you are, you should know enough about life to know that like not everybody gets to do the ideal situation.
The choice doesn't, and also,
or should they have to really?
The cost, even for someone who was well paid, was staggering.
Yeah.
And quickly.
Yeah. My friends were having kids.
Ate away at my savings that I had accumulated over many years. Childcare is an absurdly expensive thing, and I wasn't asking for a subsidy or anything like that. But to me, I was like, if I can't afford this, how do people afford it? They don't.
Right. Yeah. They don't. It doesn't happen for a lot of them. The main reason you're here is because this season is focused on giving advisors. That's what we're going to talk about your career as a giving advisor for the rest of the episode.
Sure.
Who's giving do you advise currently?
Okay, so I run a foundation called Inherent Foundation. I'm the Inherent managing director, first staff person of the foundation. Almost a year in.
You mentioned a 990. Is this a private foundation?
It is. We do get support from Inherent Group, which is an investment manager, and funding funding and back office support. But the primary donor is the CEO of Inherent Group, and
John Inherent.
His name is Tony Davis. It's been. Is
that his middle name, Inherent?
No. Inherent is not his name.
Okay. All right.
Previously, I worked at the Milken Institute Center for Strategic Philanthropy, and we had multiple clients, donors. Multiple clients that we did advising for. And then when I was at Maverick Capital, that was a corporate foundation, but supported through employee giving. So I ran the foundation, but I also worked with a lot of the employees individually on their giving and board stuff and learning how to be better givers or whatever. I am, and as I have evolved in my career in philanthropy and advising, much more fluid, I think, in terms of the way I think about giving and impact, in quotation marks. When I was younger and more, and frankly, just less experienced and less evolved as a human being, I was like, this is how people should give, and they should give to things that have are using their dollars efficiently. And I still think that that's the case, but in terms of what I think is efficient, that has changed. Like, we used to have the standard of, what overhead should be, and now I don't really care what it is.
When I started as a fundraiser, it was the best, you were hearing it from everybody, and they said it like it was, I remember when I first heard it, I thought it was like an actual law.
Yeah, felt like it.
That you can't spend more than 10% on administrative costs.
Which is insane.
Which is so low.
It's disgusting.
I spend 45% on overhead.
But
and none of my donors care about that.
I mean,
it's never come up.
As long as you're doing your job, I don't really care. And
everything costs money. Everything costs so much money.
Everything costs so much. And if you want something to be done well, sometimes you actually do need to pay for it.
Yeah.
Or depending on where the organization is located, their rent could be one of their biggest line items, not even their staff.
And moving back to Maine was nice on that.
Oh gosh.
I have a much nicer office for a third of the cost.
That's amazing. But again, and unrestricted multi-year giving is something that I push everyone to do. It's like, why are you trying to starve people? If you want something done, it should be done. And I'm not saying that's across the board for
during
every
our recent
cause or
virtual symposium, we made some recommendations to funders, and number one was multi-year general operating gifts. But we talked a little bit about some of the challenges there.
Absolutely.
So yes, those are great. Obviously, as a fundraiser, woohoo, right? Not really anything you'd want more than dollars for a while, right? That you can spend on whatever you need to spend it on. As a donor, though, right? Maybe you have unlimited funds, and you can go around making 10-year-long general operating gifts to new groups every year. But most people will run out of money quicker than you think doing multi-general year. So it does require you to be even more thoughtful about who you select.
Well, absolutely.
And possibly to select fewer grantees.
Absolutely. Yes. So I am also a proponent of I'd rather give bigger chunks to a smaller group and have greater involvement from, advisory, capacity building standpoint, whatever it is, than have 50 grant recipients at $10,000 where I don't feel like I have a relationship or I feel like the dollars are actually making a difference. I get it, though. I also understand that we have to be flexible because, again, we talked earlier on about how giving is emotional, giving is relational. And so some of your gifts are not going to, quote unquote, make sense or going to be perfect or whatever standard that you're holding yourself to. But I think we have to allow for that. I think we have to allow for a mixed group of, I give to tons of stuff. My primary gift is to the organization I sit on the board of. That's the one that I advocate the most for. But within my portfolio of $25 gifts, I'll give to everything that I am, many things that I'm asked for, many things that I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of just I think at least a good rule of thumb. There's certain things that you focus your time and your energy on and the greatest percentage of your giving. But there's going to be things on the periphery or organizations like food security organizations that might need money in perpetuity because people are hungry. Maybe we will solve the hunger crisis at some point, but not for a while. That's okay. I think it's okay to have a mix.
So when I think the way we first met actually was I was trying to interview Catherine Bradley for the podcast. You worked
for her, yes.
Right, and it was called City Learn Serve or something like that. CityBridge. Learn Serve is a completely different thing, but I guess two nouns. So Catherine Bradley's a pretty well known donor, but that was you weren't doing donor advising there.
No, I was actually I worked at CityBridge when it moved from CityBridge Foundation, which was the family philanthropy.
I think we met in the Watergate.
Yes, exactly. Now it's CityBridge Education, which is a public charity. There is still CityBridge, the foundation, the family foundation, but that's I didn't have anything to do with that after we transitioned. Sure. And then I was actually doing institutional fundraising for CityBridge Education.
And then before that, Robin Hood Foundation up in New York.
That's correct.
Which is a very large
charity
funder of, but they raise money from the wealthy in New York, and somewhat, and I guess it could be called giving advising because Robin Hood doesn't just keep the money; they then give it. They do give grants out to.
Exactly.
I think,
yeah, they give.
I don't really know. I've never talked to anyone at Robin Hood, but it's very well known.
Yeah. Raise money. It's not endowed. They do have a cash reserve.
It's like the elite of New York donate to this.
Absolutely. The billionaires.
They go to fancy
New
tuxedo
York.
events.
Not anymore. Actually, they're trying to be cool.
There
so
were-
it's
there
always
were-
like
There was once upon a time
they still
a
have
very fancy tuxedo event.
They have a very big event. It's not a tuxedo event. Explicitly not tuxedo. It's explicitly not black tie, but it is still a very expensive, very fancy event. At the Javits Center, like 4,000 people. It's actually an incredibly well-run event. They run great events. So I worked there. Now, actually, they do, I think, do more explicit philanthropy advising because they have now set up DAFs, which is a very smart idea.
Especially if you want the amount of money you manage to be the largest pile. When I started in philanthropy, people would start a foundation. Probably now it's a DAF.
Exactly.
The thing with those is that as a fundraiser, it's difficult to.
Very.
The system with foundations and everything was a nice, there was some professional courtesy there. I could look up your giving and all that without having to bother you about it.
Yeah.
And vice versa. You could look up my 990 and see how we and we could be doing the research on each other and conduct the administration of generosity from our respective sides in a professional capacity. Yeah. I think we threw DAFs into the mix without any consideration of the professional relationships there. And it's the general thing. Whenever someone comes to me and says I've just started a DAF, I do try to remind them. I'm that does make things difficult for the fundraiser, because certainly the wealth manager who sold you on the DAF in the first place isn't going to point that out.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you for doing that. Actually, I get
a lot of my gifts now from DAFs. They arrive 9 months after the donor initiates them.
So I think there's a great administrative aspect of it. Obviously, the problem is that people put their money there and it just sits there, or it goes to their alma mater, or it goes to some random thing that they've asked their managers to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so they're so disconnected from it, and that's to me the problem. I think there's ways to do it better.
I've seen in their materials sometimes they talk about we gave out 86% or whatever this year. I'm like, yes, but it's all tax receipted. 100% of it got a tax receipt. So you hoarded 14%. But they say it like a positive, look, this number's going up, right? Before DAFs, it was 100. That was 100%. You had the money had to get to the. You shouldn't be, in general, if I were going to do a regulatory fix, it would be you don't get the receipt until the money's actually at an operating charity. Yeah. Which, quite frankly, I don't know why you would. When I remember, I think they might have changed this with one of the tax laws. It's hard to keep up, but I think you used to the only one who could send you a receipt is the actual C3. But I think that's the DAF has a seat. They have their own seat. That's how they're able to do it.
Exactly.
And
that's the problem.
That is what are they doing? They're not charity operators. They just have paperwork.
And as a result, too, as you said, there's no way to be okay, who did you get? Because Fidelity gives out billions of dollars on an annual basis, but who's going through their list of billions?
Someone in April gave me $220. The check, I don't have the check, and I don't know who that person is yet.
So,
my standard as a fundraiser is I want to acknowledge gifts within 48 hours. But this particular DAF is making it impossible. I actually don't think I'm going to get the check. I think they're planning to keep it, or they're going to make it too hard.
That's insane.
It is actually almost every time I get a check from a DAF, and I need to spend time reminding my evaluators that if they give through a vehicle, that they actually need to follow up with the vehicle and make sure they do and tell me that it's coming so that I can follow up with them too. Because I'm pretty sure there's there's probably donors. So, and then so Benevity manages a lot of workplace giving programs, and they're worse than most DAFs. So if you volunteer with me, a lot of folks at work will they'll donate to anywhere you volunteered at, and that's managed by Benevity. And so you just tell your HR manager where you volunteered, and they initiate it, and I don't find out about it, and Benevity doesn't send me the check. They just keep that money.
Well, I think it's...
And they think, that donor thinks they donated to me, and that I never thank them. Yeah. This is a very bad... And I know it's happening, but I don't know who they are. There's nothing I can do to fix it.
There's nothing you can do, because it's completely... There's a wall. There's a wall. You don't have access to that information, and they're not incented to do anything about it. Yep. And it's completely theoretically, it should work, and it should be a really easy, fluid process. From an administration standpoint, the people are managing the money. You don't have to deal with dealing with the taxes. I've made
donating to unfunded lists very easy. I don't need Benevity's help.
You don't need anyone's
I
help.
can provide a tax receipt. I can acknowledge it quickly. You
I'm
can donate
talking
right on my
about
website. None of the services that they like go out there and like talk about to these workplace programs are like real. I don't need any of it. Like if that HR manager could just do that donation directly to my nonprofit and get that receipt. Like Benevity's not doing anything other than holding it up, but they've got like a marketing team. It's very good at convincing. It's very good at convincing these folks. But like it's the of the things I plan to like. Sometimes you can't fight City Hall, and like actually, yeah, I think that's a bad expression because you can City Hall. First of all, those are very nice people down there. It's pretty well organized. You don't need to fight them. They're just trying to help you get your paperwork.
Yeah.
Right. And if you needed to fight them, you probably can. People have sued City Hall many times and won. You can't fight Google, Facebook. Like you can't really fight Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Like you have a complaint or something like you can't. There's no real people reading your complaint. Like that's who you absolutely can't fight. And Benevity's the same thing. Whenever I like find out about these checks and try to follow up on it, it's just they open a ticket and then they like immediately ask me like, how was the service you received? I'm like, I haven't received any service.
So how would I?
Early in your what's interesting to me is early in your career, you were doing things that are very similar to giving advising, right? Wealthy people in New York want to support poverty. Robinhood helps them, is helping them to do that, right? Catherine Bradley has some money, really cares about education, and like really cares, and has been operating a variety of vehicles, right?
A lot of them.
Doing everything that she can to like be involved. Like I remember that was a name that came up just all the time in my early fundraising days in DC. So not just like running grant making and running a charity, but also like using her name and being an issue advocate and all of that. But again, not a donor advisor there. Mm-hmm. Your first donor advising is Center for Strategic Philanthropy.
I would say no. My first donor
Maverick Collective.
Maverick Collective, something else, but Maverick Capital Foundation. Jeez, I can't even speak. Maverick Capital Foundation, I would say, was my first real advising. Actually, there was one thing before that, but it was quickly defunct. Mm-hmm. But that was my first real advising role because I was setting up the foundation, but then again, also working very closely with members of the staff who are all at that point generating a fair amount of wealth or earning, starting to get there.
So this is this another investment firm? Like it was
a hedge fund.
Okay. And
so the people there donated to the foundation, and so there was foundation giving, but then there was also individual giving that I'd help people with, like, I care about this thing. And
just like Rockefeller hired a nun a long time ago, this investment house is like, we need to hire somebody. And here's this great lady. She's worked at Robinhood and for Catherine Bradley, and she can help us. That's generally the thinking?
Out of order, but yes. So Robinhood, Maverick, CityBridge.
Oh, so you never, okay. But then you were were you the director of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy?
I was a director. So there were multiple directors.
Your title was director?
Yes, director, Center for Strategic Philanthropy. And that was more explicitly consulting and advising.
So that's where people are setting up DAFs.
People are setting up DAFs, trying to figure out which governance structure made sense. Sometimes it made sense for us to be just holding their money and giving it out effectively as their outsourced foundation.
I mean, he can't own stock, but he can manage. Well, no, it's a public.
It's a charity, so
charity. And so what's interesting to me is there's some overlap between like managing an investment fund and managing a big philanthropy fund.
Absolutely.
And you're still able to like use the fund management skills, right, going into a new sector. Mm-hmm. But also there are some super major differences.
Absolutely. Lots of differences.
You don't get to get any return off of it. Nope. And one of the things I was talking about yesterday, which sort of the first time Chandler brought this up, and so the first time I've really thought about it through this lens. So if you're considering making a donation and you look at a small nonprofit, you might learn that the culture there is not great. Everyone's a little bit overworked. Mm-hmm. Maybe the boss is burnt out and like somewhat of a toxic personality, or like just has some flaws with his leadership. Mm-hmm. All of it stems from the fact that they don't have enough funding and everyone's doing too much work. Like that's the problem, right? Which could be solved by you making a large grant to
Yeah.
it. But you won't make that grant because of those problems.
It depends.
You might. And it's a decision that certainly some philanthropists say, like,
Absolutely.
this toxic culture, I don't want to fund it.
Absolutely.
Even though the funding is exactly what they need to fix that.
If we can identify that that is the core issue and not a leadership, an endemic leadership issue, yeah, then I'm like...
This guy's great at his job. He's just never been trained as a manager.
I'm currently...
I've met a lot of people like that.
And I'm currently funding some organizations where the leadership is just like, it was a homegrown organization. They have the germ of a great idea. They need to be quote unquote professionalized, which is something that I'm questioning as a philanthropist or philanthropy advisor at this point, because that just means acting in a way that is much more quote unquote white, and appearing to fit into certain parameters. Anyway, but yeah, I'm thinking of someone right now. He's great. He has great passion, great vision. He does not have a great leadership team, but he is a natural leader, and the organization is already doing well in spite of that. And if you're able to sort of identify where the real challenges are, you can give... I gave them an unrestricted gift, and I'm going to be like, here, use it for what you want. I suggest that you get an org coach. Mm-hmm. I suggest, et cetera, et cetera. And here's a list of people that I know that might be great. But again, it's unrestricted. I didn't ask for
This is fascinating. So as from on the investment side of things, a similar organization that has a for-profit structure that we can invest in and get return from might look like an extremely solid investment because we know exactly what needs to be fixed and we know how we can use money to fix it. I think there are VC firms
Absolutely.
where what I just described is exactly what they look for.
Absolutely.
However, there are foundations where what I just described is what they might literally have it on their website, though we do not fund these things.
Absolutely. And I think
and you doing the advising for investors and right?
Yeah.
Using that strategy, do you think the fact that they come from an investment world makes them more tolerant to
No, in fact,
sort
the
of...
complete opposite. My history of working with very wealthy people in the finance sector, PE, VC, whatever, is that they're far more conservative with their philanthropic dollars than they are with their investment dollars.
So why do you suppose that is? Because I've seen that. The same decision in the same situation,
Absolutely.
basically. You've just changed the tax code of the organization.
Because for some, honestly, if I knew the answer to that question, I think I would be a lot more successful. I don't actually understand. It's when I sort of explain to them that it's the same situation that they're like, oh yeah, I guess that does make sense. But it's somehow people feel a lot less risk tolerant with their philanthropic dollars than they do with their investment dollars. Like, we have super high tolerance for risk in investing. It's like, yeah, it could work. It could also completely fail and I lose all my money. But when it's like a nonprofit, somehow we were like, well, it has to be successful. Well, first of all, we have to think about what success looks like. But also, it's an idea.
I don't know that much about the hedge fund industry, but it's about like hedging bets.
Exactly.
You make a risky one, and then you balance that
high risk, high reward
with other, or if you have enough capital to make a very large number of risky bets, you know that's something that
exactly within your portfolio, one might be successful.
They get very specific about these numbers too, right? They're like, we're doing this many plays because, and in fact, I've heard instances where like they will literally invest in like any blockchain thing, right, in the beginning or in the beginning of new technology. Like literally, they don't need to see anything. They're just looking to get into a piece of literally everything in the field because they know something's going to come out.
Exactly.
Right, and then when it comes to a social problem, right, instead of just investing in everyone that same strategy could be a real game changer.
Yeah.
And we don't see it. Is there a chance that perhaps they will
I hope that
come along to this conclusion?
I think so. I think that thankfully in the last few years, I've seen far more trends in philanthropy. Again, we still have to actually execute on it rather than talk about it. But I've seen far more trends in philanthropy of people being like, you know what? A, these people actually know more about this issue than I do. B, these dollars have to go out. So put them out there. And I think that we do have leaders, first of all, a lot of pushback in philanthropy in general over the last few years around social issues and, wealth hoarding in philanthropy. So I think that the culture change is happening. Again, I don't think it's being executed as much. I also see that people like Mackenzie Bezos. Oh, sorry, excuse me, Mackenzie Scott.
I do it all the time.
So apologies, I hate
It's
doing
just that
that.
Scott is such a regular name. That's why I think that's why. I don't do this
Yes.
with like anybody else.
Well, I caught myself doing it with Melinda French the other day. Melinda French as well. I think
yeah,
they
such a big name
are
for so long.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like what
It's
you're used
really
to saying.
hard to. Yeah.
But anyway, both of them have, I think, become models, and it's not just accidental that everyone's like, thank God they're doing it. It's like, first of all, they have untold amounts of money, and it doesn't really matter. Like, she just gave out $2 billion the other day. It's like, ultimately, like, she is doing, like, okay, all of these organizations, they're doing good stuff.
And for a couple different causes, it is more or less that she gave to everybody.
Yeah.
That's all very interesting. The thing for me, like, this is called the Open Door Philanthropy Podcast, and that process is a closed door one. We don't know anything about it, which is how probably I guess most people give. They're just not getting the same level of scrutiny.
Absolutely.
Again, I like to go back to the challenge on fundraisers, right?
Yes, it's a huge challenge for fundraisers.
They basically, if you want a gift from, wait and hope that it comes is really the only thing you can do.
The only thing you can do.
There's no people. I've had people in the next few weeks. I'm doing report discussions. People we've just given feedback to on their proposals, and it'll be Mackenzie Scott or somebody else. A few of them will have like a uber famous wealthy donor, and they've read an article that they have some kind of evidence to suggest that like they care about the cause or whatever, and they're like laser. That's the solution to their problems. How, Dave? Can you introduce me to Oprah? I have actually been asked. Like, it's a question I've been asked. No. If you're sitting there wondering if maybe I can,
the answer is no.
No, of course even if I knew her, I can't.
Yeah. But, and look, I'm actually literally in that position right now.
And why would she? Why, like,
she
wants to talk to you about your fundraising thing. She will. She's Oprah. I can't.
Mackenzie Scott made donations to Easter. So I'm on the board of Easter Seals, DC, and
cool.
Maryland, Virginia.
We read a proposal from Easter Seals, New Orleans once.
So she made a lot of gifts to Easter Seals because there's a national office and then there's
here
franchises.
In DC. The national's in DC, I think.
No, the national's in Chicago.
Oh.
We are one of the bigger franchisees. She gave to a bunch of them, not to ours. She gave to Easter Seals National Capital Region, which is not the same as ours, which is crazy. And so our CEO, because of my history and the networks that I've worked in, which are full of billionaires, and they all do kind of know each other, he was like, well, is there any way we can figure out why we didn't get it or we can get to her? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, no.
Like, I don't know why we didn't get it, and I probably never will, but we can't chase shadows. Like, like in that case in particular, there's absolutely nothing we can do about it until one of her advisors reaches out and says, hey, we want to give you some money.
Yeah,
if that happens, it'll be great.
This is important stuff for fundraisers to hear. It is one of the most common questions I get is how to approach invitation-only funders or funders that have said they don't want to be approached. And lots of times, like when we're asked that question, we don't the answer's not what they want to hear. Obviously, the answer's not what they want to hear, and so sometimes we just sort of use a lot of words and don't answer the question.
Yeah.
But I do like to be pretty what's the best way to approach someone who has said very clearly that they don't want to be approached?
It's not approach.
You shouldn't approach them.
Don't approach them.
There is no real strategy for this. Continue to be a useful actor in the field.
Exactly.
Get back to work.
And in these cases, it's do your best and hope they notice you. If, for example, like there's lots of...
There's no one person in the world that you need.
So you
can do your work without any one person.
If you have a website of an organization that's like, okay, we're no unsolicited applications, fine. But certainly if I know someone in the staff, I'll ask them a question. Mm-hmm. But if I don't know, there's nothing... I can't do anything about it.
And you can be prepared. So when we've reviewed proposals I once did one of these report discussions with a group the day after they got a $10 million gift from Mackenzie. And I remember I'm about to we've reviewed their proposal and given them critical feedback, and I'm going to talk to them about how to improve their proposals, right? They showed up. They were very interested actually, and they thought, and we pivoted the conversation a little bit in light of what had happened, right? They how can they take this feedback? Some of the feedback is programmatic, and they can now do something about it because they have money, right? So it was a very useful conversation. It was very interesting to talk to them, and I've talked to several other folks who've got some of the funding. And one of the things the news articles make it seem like these things come completely out of the blue. And that's probably not true. Almost everybody had at least one conversation or got reached out to by someone who does what you do.
Exactly.
And sometimes they reach out and they don't say who the donor is. They just have a few questions. So if you're wondering what you can do, you can be prepared for that. Be able to answer questions. Practice answering questions. Have as many meetings as you can with smart people who ask questions and practice answering them, right? And have materials that you can share and be ready, right, if they call. Right, but you can't. It is it's personal heartbreak for me. I see a lot of organizations and their fundraising strategy is we need to reach this one person. Mm-mm. We have kind of a celebrity obsessed culture.
Yeah.
I think beyond fundraising, everybody's got the one celebrity they'd like to meet, right? And it's we get really into it. When it comes to billionaires, there's thousands of them. So even billionaires alone, you don't that one billionaire is inaccessible. Go to one of the other ones. Others. And again, like I said before, one of the things that no one's ever said is, "Oh no, I can't afford that. I only have $900 million." Right? And in fact, depending on what you do, someone who only has $1 million might be able to solve all of your problems.
More than absolutely.
I have worked with a lot of people on their fundraising, and I don't think the people who raised the most money necessarily had the most impact. I also don't think that the people who raised the least money had the least impact.
Absolutely.
I've seen some correlation. Obviously, things can be paid for with money.
Yeah.
But Unfundless has been around for 7 years and has never had too much of a budget. In that time, I've seen many groups finish successful Series A rounds in the tens of millions and go out of business.
Exactly.
All in the time that I've been here with my nothing budget. And last month, we reviewed our 1,000th proposal.
That's awesome.
And you've reviewed probably 15 of those.
Yeah, that's right.
Participated in quite a few rounds. We have a few reviewers who got over 100 this round, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing.
And I myself am over 700.
Whoa.
And Jane Moss, my mother, over 5. It's a lot of proposals to read. Some of them every now and then I'll see one in the file and I'll be like, I've never heard of that. But once upon a time, I was intimately familiar with it. Anyway, thank you very much for evaluating proposals with us and for all of the work that you do. I have 2 more questions for you before we wrap up. And they're going to be easy ones. Softballs. On a lot of philanthropy podcasts, these are the only questions they ask. But what are you most excited about in philanthropy?
I'm really excited about the fact that philanthropy, or at least, again, within the culture of philanthropy, people are also thinking about how to engage financial services and regular investors into nonprofits and social enterprises. The advent or the passing of the law around program-related investments, I think, is something that has been amazing, and mission-related investments, something those things I'm very passionate about, because we're never going to get where we need to go with just philanthropy. It's not going to be possible. There's trillions of dollars sitting there that needs to go somewhere. Why not go into the great work that's being done? But we still see nonprofits as this sort of separate thing when they're intimate and important to our culture and our society. So they shouldn't be relegated to the sidelines. I also am hoping that we get to a point where philanthropy isn't even as necessary because, first of all, nonprofits have more sustainable funding streams, either from government or from revenue generation or from investment from the private sector, or that businesses just actually start doing the right things and not start, but more of them move into doing the right things as core business, as opposed to, again, we do an employee outing once a year, or we do a check writing thing once a year. It has to be built into the culture in order for it to be sustained and actually create any sort of groundswell. And I think it's happening. It might not happen in the next 10 years, but I think that it is happening. And it's certainly happening a lot more over abroad than it is happening here.
Indeed. At our symposium, we did a session with program officers at foundations, and they were all, we had two, an Australian foundation and a Canadian foundation. And talking to them and doing the research into it and all of that was very enlightening for me. I actually don't have all that much experience with international foundations. Those folks know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Particularly up in Canada, these are very organized outfits.
Yeah.
They have a lot of, those two countries have big advantages on
Yes.
us in that the healthcare is covered for all their citizens. And also they will take action on urgent social issues legislatively.
Yes.
So for instance, the amount of philanthropy dollars going to gun control and gun prevention has been increasing quite a bit over the last 10 years. And when I told my Australian friend that, who runs Greater Charitable Foundation, she was... It's strange to see an Australian be so sad for America.
No, yeah.
But it was so... she couldn't fathom that. Because there they just saw... that's something the government should solve.
Of course.
And her foundation gets to focus on, like, funding needful small projects in the community. I do think there will always be people with extra wealth who want to use that extra wealth to help.
Yeah.
So I don't think philanthropy goes away. I also think currently it's a very large part of the economy, right? And you're right, it gets relegated like it's some other conversation. But nonprofit employees are 1 in 5 employees.
Absolutely.
And it's philanthropy. Obviously, they make money, they make earned revenue and other things, but the donations is a percentage of GDP. It's 3% of it.
It's a lot of money.
And our GDP of this country is quite high. And it's actually a little bit higher in some other countries, and probably not going to change here. One of the things that's interesting about America is we give basically the same percentage no matter what's happening.
Yeah. Sometimes even higher.
Disasters.
Yeah.
It just stays right. Everything could be fine, and we just keep giving.
Yeah. No, it's pretty remarkable watching those trends. Or
yes.
Not. It's just like...
Since I've started being a funder, we've had both the Giving Pledge and Giving Tuesday come out as new things. Those did not exist when I started in fundraising, and they're now pretty well-known things. And Giving stayed
because
a
people
flat
are
percentage. Those are well-known campaigns for giving more, for encouraging people to give a higher amount. There's also a new one run by Melanie Lundquist, which is like the campaign to accelerate charitable giving.
Oh, I've never. There's the 1%, Founders 1%. There's a few iterations of
Founders
them.
Pledge.
Founders
I
Pledge. Sorry.
I remember talking to them. Yeah, there's something with 1% in there. And there, when I got to the end of that conversation, it was just like, and I was like, how do you make? They're like, they just a donor advised fund. If you look at all these things, it's like how they make money is like, and we've set up a donor advised fund, right?
The thing about all of these things.
At least the Giving Pledge isn't a fund that they're managing.
No,
that would be very untoward. I think
the parameters around the Giving Pledge are so loose, right? So it's
most of them have seen their wealth increase by over 100%. The average is like 117%.
Yeah, at least.
I have numbers somewhere. I'm planning on writing something up about it.
But the fact is,
because actually Bezos just said he was going to sign it, and like that does. Now we should know that doesn't mean anything. They don't give.
They still aren't, because they're like...
They don't do it. They sign the pledge and then don't do it. Actually, what Melanie Lundquist, she has signed it, but she was like, signing it didn't make me, didn't change anything.
There's nothing, you're not held accountable to giving or within a particular time frame. It's not saying you're going to give half of your wealth in the next 10 years.
Right.
Or in the next 20. Or even create bequests
and
do that.
If you die and don't do it, then they can't. Then you're
What
dead
are
and
they gonna do?
there's nothing they can do about it.
And that's the problem with the Giving Pledge, is that there's no account. It's a nice thing to say you're going to do, but it's not actionable.
We've made it very easy for billionaires and donors to get great press. And just hardly any criticism.
For doing the least.
Doing very little. I mean, there was one time, I forget which gift, it was when John Paulson gave $400 million to Harvard.
Ugh.
Malcolm Gladwell created a Twitter account, because of that. And I think it's been a while since I checked. This might be the only tweet he ever tweeted, and it was just, how do I give back without giving back? Bezos gave $100 million to Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
I love
Dolly Parton.
But that's, and I honestly, I think
it's not even a rounding error.
She'll do a good job with it or whatever. But I don't like that bad things are being said about me, and I want to solve it with this. Who's popular? He probably had somebody run the numbers on like comparing his polling to Dolly's, right? And she probably has the like best favorables with the people who don't like him. And so that's why they chose, like, this is entirely about, not entirely.
No, but the thing that's, again, remarkable.
Probably, if good gets done, he's not bothered by that, but, like, I really don't believe that's why that happened.
And I actually don't necessarily care if they care about doing good or good press, because hopefully someone is advising them, like, these are some great ideas or organizations. Just give more to them. Like, Dolly is amazing, and I've been a beneficiary because my son got books every month for 5 years. It's freaking awesome. There are millions of Dollies. If you gave out, you would still have so much money. Like, that's to me, again, it's the reluctance to just act that I find frustrating, and that I ultimately still don't understand. There's great proven stuff.
Some of it's very confusing.
Just fund it.
And again, I can't afford that. I only have $900 million.
By the way, that has happened to me. Where I had
someone said that a version of that sentence?
Not a version of that. Because there were billionaires that went from $4 billion to $3 billion. They were like, we're really pulling back. I'm like, this $100,000
some of that
makes
just
no
comes.
difference.
Some of that just comes to them from honestly, a lot of this comes back to the fact that billion sounds like million, and we actually do not have brains capable of comprehending these numbers.
Yeah, they're too
and
high.
we say that out loud all the time, like we know the 3 billion and 4 billion, like we know the difference between those two things, and you don't. If I showed you a pile of 3 billion marbles and a pile of 4 billion marbles, it would look like two huge piles of marbles.
Yes. It's an absurd amount of money.
So thank you very much. We've had, as usual on the podcast, a nice long chat about philanthropy. It's been a pleasure. Checkout at this hotel is in 23 minutes. So we need to wrap up.
Okay.
As you can see, I'm packed up and ready to go. Made my own bed. I did my best.
Yes.
And anyway, so as a final thing, and our as you know, or as you may know, our most dedicated listeners do listen to the very end of the podcast. I have some analytics, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure they're just leaving it on while they do other things, but we get a lot of folks come to the end. So is there anything you'd like to plug? Is there a website for your current work or anything you're doing now that you want to tell them about?
I would plug, well, first of all, I'm Mally Locke, Inherent Foundation. I'm on LinkedIn. You know, I actually do accept a lot of requests and read the emails, because I think that it's part of my job to be responsive. But if you are interested in giving, just give. Like, it's not that hard. And I know that especially when you have less money, people feel like, okay, they have less money to give. That's okay. The most generous people in our world are some of the poorest people in our world. And you make a difference. If you can't give money, do something else. Read a book. Read about policies. Be actively engaged. And if you want a charity, Easter Seals, DCMDVA, we could always use unrestricted dollars.
And there's probably an Easter Seals chapter in their local area.
Absolutely.
I know you have a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. Mm-hmm. And I admire you abiding. Thanks for all the great work. Also, right, you for evaluating proposals with us. If people are considering submitting a proposal here, you might be one of the evaluators they hear from. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody at home, for listening. Good luck with your fundraising and with your grant making. Okay, thank you. Oh, and thank you to David Jaffe for editing the episode.
Thank you for having me.